I still remember the exact moment my world tilted sideways. I was standing at the front of the conference room presenting our quarterly projections when Keller, my boss, interrupted me mid-sentence. His voice cut through the air like a knife slicing through butter. "Amelia," he said, "I think it's best if Mason takes over the Henderson project from here." The room went silent. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward me waiting for my reaction. Mason sat 3 seats down from me, his expression a perfect mask of surprise and concern. But I caught that tiny flicker of satisfaction in his eyes before he adjusted his face into something resembling humility. My hands trembled slightly as I gripped the presentation remote. The Henderson project was mine. I had spent 6 months building that relationship, nurturing it through countless late nights and weekend calls. Now Keller was handing it to Mason like it was nothing more than an old magazine. I forced myself to nod, keeping my voice steady. "Course, whatever you think is best." The words tasted like ash in my mouth, but I refused to let them see me break. Not here, not now, not in front of everyone. Back in my office, I sat frozen, staring at my computer screen without really seeing it. The words on the monitor blurred together into meaningless shapes. My hands rested on the keyboard, but I couldn't make myself type anything. Outside my glass walls, I could see my colleagues moving past, heads down, avoiding eye contact. They had all witnessed my humiliation, and now they pretended I didn't exist. My phone buzzed with a message from Mason. "Hey Amelia, I'm really sorry about what happened there. I know how much Henderson meant to you. If you need anything, just let me know, okay?" I read it 3 times, feeling anger build in my chest like a slow-burning fire. His fake sympathy made my skin crawl. I deleted the message without responding. What could I possibly say to him? The person who had smiled while watching my project get ripped away. The silence in my office felt oppressive. I had worked at this company for 7 years, building my reputation one careful brick at a time. Now it felt like someone had kicked the whole structure down in under 5 minutes. 2 years ago, everything had been different. I remembered the day Mason walked into our office looking nervous and eager like a puppy on its first day at a new home. He was fresh out of graduate school with impressive credentials but zero real-world experience. Keller had assigned him to shadow me and learn the ropes. I didn't mind. I actually enjoyed mentoring people, helping them navigate the tricky waters of corporate consulting. Mason had been grateful back then, almost embarrassingly so. He would bring me coffee in the mornings, asking a million questions about client management and presentation strategies. When he fumbled his first major presentation, I had stepped in, smoothly redirecting the conversation and saving him from complete disaster. Afterward, he thanked me with genuine warmth in his eyes. "I don't know what I would have done without you, Amelia. Seriously, thank you." I smiled and told him that's what teammates do. We help each other succeed. Looking back now, I realized how naive I had been. I had taught him everything I knew, every trick, every strategy, every way to read a client's body language. And now he was using all of it against me. The first signs of trouble appeared gradually, like cracks forming in a dam. Mason started taking shortcuts on his reports, recycling my research without giving credit. At first I thought it was just inexperience. Maybe he didn't understand proper attribution yet. So I pulled him aside gently one afternoon and explained how important it was to cite sources and acknowledge contributions. He had apologized immediately, his face flushing with what looked like genuine embarrassment. "You're absolutely right, Amelia. I'm still learning the protocols here. Won't happen again, I promise." But there had been something in his eyes that day, something I couldn't quite name. It was there for just a second before he blinked it away. A hardness, a coldness that didn't match his apologetic words. I convinced myself I had imagined it. People make mistakes, especially when they're new. I wanted to believe he was still the eager, grateful mentee I had taken under my wing. But deep down, some instinct whispered that something had shifted. Mason wasn't the same person anymore. Or maybe he never had been, and I was only now seeing his true face. 3 months later, a client praised Mason during a conference call for a marketing strategy one had developed. I was sitting right there listening as they gushed about his innovative thinking and creative approach. Mason nodded along, accepting the compliments with practiced humility. Thank you so much. I really tried to think outside the box on this one. He didn't correct them. He didn't say actually Amelia came up with that framework or this was a team effort. He just took the credit and smiled. Keller was on the call too, and I watched through my computer camera as pride spread across his face. Mason, you're really proving yourself here. Great work. My stomach twisted into knots. After the call ended, I sat in silence staring at the blank screen. Should I say something? Should I correct the record? But what would that accomplish? I would look petty defensive like I was scrambling for recognition. So I said nothing. I let it slide. That was my first mistake. Because silence, Mason learned, is the same as permission. And he was just getting started. Mason began copying my communication style using the same phrases and email formats I had perfected over years. He would CC Keller on messages where he subtly repositioned my ideas as collaborative efforts that he had helped shape. The word appeared constantly in his updates, even when I had done the work alone. He started joining Keller for drinks after work, laughing loudly at jokes that weren't funny. I would see them through the office windows, heads close together talking in low voices. Sometimes they would glance in my direction, then quickly look away. The exclusion was deliberately calculated. Mason was building an alliance and I was being pushed to the outside. Invitations to client dinners started going to him instead of me. Keller would say things like, Mason's really connecting with the younger clients, or I think Mason's energy is what this account needs. Each comment was a small cut, individually minor, but together they bled me slowly. I tried to stay focused on my work, letting quality speak for itself. But in corporate environments, perception often matters more than performance. And Mason was a master at managing perception. Then the whispers started. I first heard them through Jessica, one of the junior analysts who still liked me. Amelia, she said hesitantly. I thought you should know people are saying you're difficult to work with. My blood ran cold. Difficult. I had never raised my voice, never played office politics. Never done anything except my job with excellence and integrity. Who's saying this? She looked uncomfortable. I don't know exactly. Just going around. Something about you being resistant to collaboration or territorial about your projects. Felt sick. This was Mason's doing. I was certain of it. He was poisoning the well, turning my professionalism into a character flaw. And it was working. Keller started treating me differently. His emails became shorter and colder. He stopped asking for my input in meetings. When I spoke, he would nod absently, then move on quickly like my contributions didn't matter. The walls were closing in and I didn't know how to fight back. How do you defend yourself against rumors, against whispers in hallways? Every denial makes you look guilty. So I stayed quiet and hoped the truth would eventually surface. Another mistake. I finally requested a private meeting with Keller, hoping to clear the air. We sat in his office with the door closed, and I carefully explained that I felt sidelined and that there seemed to be some misunderstanding about my working style. Keller leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Amelia, I appreciate you coming to me with this. But I have to be honest. Multiple people have expressed concerns about team harmony. Your approach can be a bit rigid sometimes. Rigid. The word stung like a slap. I had always been flexible, collaborative, and supportive. But I could see in his eyes that he had already made up his mind. Mason had gotten to him first and planted seeds of doubt that had now taken root. Anything I said would sound defensive, would confirm whatever narrative had been built around me. I thanked him for his time and left his office feeling hollow inside. The unfairness of it burned quietly beneath my calm surface. I had mentored Mason and taught him everything that protected him from his own mistakes. And now he had turned Keller against me using lies and manipulation. The betrayal cut deeper than any professional setback ever had. Then I discovered something that changed everything. I was reviewing expense reports for a budget meeting when I noticed discrepancies in Mason's submissions. Project hours that didn't match timesheets. Client dinners that seemed suspiciously expensive. I dug deeper, pulling files and cross-referencing dates. The pattern became clear. Mason had been inflating numbers, padding his billable hours, claiming expenses that never happened. It was a fraud, plain and simple. My hands shook as I compiled the evidence. This was serious enough to end his career, maybe even result in criminal charges. But I hesitated. If I reported this to Keller, would he even believe me? Or would Mason spin it somehow to make it look like I was retaliating by fabricating evidence because I was bitter about losing the Henderson project? I thought about it for days, the proof sitting in a folder on my desktop. Every time I looked at it, I felt that same uncertainty. What was the right move? Report it and risk being dismissed as vindictive? Or stay silent and let him continue stealing? Neither option felt safe. Before I could decide, Mason made his move. He scheduled a meeting with Keller and preemptively accused me of blocking progress and hoarding credit. I found out when Keller called me into his office, his expression was hard and disappointed. "Amelia, Mason came to me with some serious concerns about your behavior. He says you've been undermining his work, refusing to share resources, making it difficult for him to succeed." I stared at Keller, unable to believe what I was hearing. Mason was accusing me of exactly what he had been doing. It was projection at its most cynical, most calculated. I tried to defend myself, but every word sounded weak and desperate. Keller cut me off. "I've made a decision. You're being removed from the Henderson project, effective immediately. Mason will take full control." The room tilted. I gripped the armrest of my chair, fighting to stay composed. This couldn't be happening. I had done nothing wrong, yet I was being punished while Mason, the actual liar and fraud, was being rewarded. When I left Keller's office, my legs felt unsteady, like the ground beneath me had turned to water. That night I sat alone in my dark apartment, staring out the window at the city lights below. My reflection looked back at me, pale and hollow-eyed, like a stranger wearing my face. I replayed the meeting over and over, searching for what I could have said differently. But the truth was, nothing I said would have mattered. Keller had already chosen his side. The betrayal felt total, absolute. I had spent years building my career, my reputation, and my relationships in that company. And in a matter of weeks, Mason had torn it all down. The worst part wasn't the professional loss, though that hurt badly enough. It was the injustice of it. Mason was a liar and a thief, yet he was winning. I was honest and hardworking, yet I was being cast out. Where was the fairness in that? Where was the justice? For a moment I considered quitting. Just walking away from the whole toxic situation, starting over somewhere else. But then something shifted inside me. A spark of anger, of resolve. Well, I wasn't going to run. If the truth couldn't speak for itself, then I would make sure it screamed. I made my decision that night, sitting in the darkness. I wouldn't quit. I wouldn't defend myself publicly. Instead, I would plan. I would be patient and methodical. Mason thought he had won, but he didn't understand that his greatest vulnerability was his arrogance. He believed his own lies and believed he was untouchable. That overconfidence would be his downfall. I opened my laptop and created a new folder labeled simply Documentation. Inside I would gather everything, every inconsistency, every falsified claim, every piece of evidence that proved what Mason really was. Not out of revenge, though I won't lie, that was part of it. But out of necessity. 'Cause people like Mason don't stop. They escalate. And eventually they make mistakes big enough that even their protectors can't ignore them. My job was to be ready when that moment came. To have everything organized, time-stamped, is undeniable. The thought calmed me and gave me purpose again. Mason had taken my project and my reputation. But he hadn't broken me. And that was going to be his biggest mistake. The next day I returned to work with a new mindset. I stopped trying to defend myself, stopped explaining, stopped fighting for recognition. Instead I watched. I observed. I documented. Every email Mason sent I saved. Every meeting I attended I took detailed notes. Every discrepancy I noticed I logged with dates and sources. I became invisible in the best way. Keller and Mason thought I was broken and defeated. They stopped paying attention to me, which gave me freedom to move unnoticed. Mason grew bolder in his lies now that he thought I was neutralized. He would exaggerate project successes in team meetings, claiming credit for outcomes that were marginal at best. He would promise clients deliverables without checking if they were feasible. And most importantly, he continued manipulating expense reports, growing careless as his confidence grew. I watched it all quietly, taking notes, building my case. My colleagues noticed the change in me. Jessica asked if I was okay if I needed to talk. I smiled and told her I was fine, just focused on my work. She looked uncertain but didn't push. But the less people knew about what I was doing, the better. Strategic withdrawal became my greatest weapon. I stopped volunteering ideas in meetings. When asked direct questions, I gave minimal responses that couldn't be twisted or stolen. I arrived early, left late, and kept my head down. To everyone else, it looked like I had accepted my diminished role. But in reality, I was creating space for Mason to hang himself. Without me to plagiarize, he had to generate his own ideas. And they weren't good. Clients started noticing the drop in quality. Conference calls that used to go smoothly now dragged on with confusion and unmet expectations. Mason would scramble, making promises he couldn't keep, then blaming junior staff when deliverables fell short. Keller began showing signs of concern. His praise for Mason became less frequent and more measured. But he was in too deep now, having publicly backed Mason over me. Admitting he was wrong would mean admitting he had been manipulated. So he doubled down, hoping things would improve. I knew they wouldn't. Because Mason wasn't actually good at this job. He was just good at taking credit for other people's work. And now there was no one left to steal from. Then Mason made his first major slip-up. A client requested revised projections for a product launch, and Mason provided numbers that were wildly optimistic and completely unsupported by market data. I saw the email and knew immediately it was wrong. The client would lose money, potentially millions, if they followed his recommendations. Part of me wanted to step in to correct it. But I stopped myself. This wasn't my project anymore. Mason was in charge. If I intervened, I would look like I was undermining him, which would confirm everything he had told Keller about me. So I let it go. I watched. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. Maybe even the hint of a smile. Mason had falsified data again, but this time it was in writing, sent directly to a major client with Keller copied on the thread. There was no way to walk it back, no way to blame someone else. The numbers were right there in black and white attached to his name. I saved the email in 3 different places. Then I sat back and waited for the inevitable explosion. 2 weeks later, corporate headquarters announced a routine financial audit. Every department would undergo review, with special attention paid to projects with large budgets and complex billing structures. The Henderson Project, Mason's new pride and joy, fit that description perfectly. I felt a quiet thrill when I saw the memo. This was exactly what I had been waiting for. The audit would be thoroughly conducted by external accountants who had no loyalty to Keller or Mason. They would examine every expense report, every billable hour, every client invoice. And they would find the discrepancies because I had already found them months ago. The difference was they had authority to act. I made sure to submit all my public reports to the audit team. Not the manipulated versions Mason had created, but the original accurate documents I had kept. Nothing illegal about that. I was simply complying with the audit requirements, providing requested information. If those documents happened to contradict Mason's versions, well, that wasn't my fault. That was just the truth rising to the surface. Mason had built his success on lies. Now those lies were about to meet scrutiny they couldn't survive. Mason started to panic, though he tried to hide it. I noticed him staying late at the office long after everyone else had gone home. Through the glass walls, I could see him hunched over his computer, deleting files and rewriting reports. His movements were jerky and anxious. He knew the audit was coming, and he knew what they would find. Keller grew tense too. In meetings, his usual confidence wavered. He defended Mason publicly, but his voice lacked conviction. I could see doubt creeping into his expression, especially when audit questions became more pointed and more specific. One morning I arrived early and found Mason already there, looking exhausted. He had clearly pulled an all-nighter. Coffee cups littered his desk and his eyes were bloodshot. He didn't notice me at first, so I watched him for a moment, frantically typing, then deleting, then typing again. When he finally looked up and saw me, he flinched. "Morning, Mason," I said pleasantly. He mumbled something back, unable to meet my eyes. But let him sweat. Let him feel what I had felt when he betrayed me. The walls were closing in on him now, and there was nowhere left to hide. The breaking point came during an audit interview. One of the external accountants pulled Mason into a conference room to discuss billing irregularities. I wasn't in the room, but Jessica told me later that Mason had come out looking pale and shaken. Within an hour, my phone buzzed with a text from him. "Did you tell them something?" I stared at the message, feeling cold satisfaction wash over me. He was scared. But typed back carefully. "Well, truth doesn't need help." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. But no response came. What could he say? He knew I had evidence. He knew I had been documenting everything. And now he realized that his lies were about to catch up with him. Keller called an emergency meeting with Mason behind closed doors. I could see them through the glass. Keller's face red and angry, Mason gesturing frantically, trying to explain. It didn't matter. The audit had uncovered too much. Inflated expenses, falsified hours, unapproved fund reallocations, all bearing Mason's signature. And because Keller had approved many of those reports, his name was implicated too. The house of cards was collapsing. Finally, the audit report was damning. It revealed systematic fraud spanning months, with clear evidence of manipulated billing records and falsified project expenses. Mason's signature appeared on documents claiming hours that security logs proved he hadn't worked. Client dinners that never happened according to restaurant records. Travel expenses for trips he never took. The numbers were staggering. Tens of thousands of dollars in fraudulent charges, all designed to make Mason look more productive and more successful than he actually was. Keller's name appeared throughout as the approving manager. Either he had been complicit or he had failed to perform basic oversight. Neither option looked good. The corporate demanded immediate explanations. Emergency meetings were called. Lawyers got involved. I watched it all unfold from my quiet corner of the office. People who had avoided me for weeks now looked at me differently. Some with guilt, recognizing they had believed lies about me. Others with curiosity wondered what I knew and when I knew it. I said nothing. Let the evidence speak. That had been my strategy from the beginning. Don't defend, don't explain, just document and wait. And now the truth was screaming so loud no one could ignore it. The corporation called a special review meeting. Every senior manager was required to attend, including me, since I had been the original project lead. Keller and Mason walked in together, both sweating despite the cool temperature. They sat at the far end of the table, avoiding eye contact with everyone. The corporate investigator began reading findings aloud. Each revelation hit like a hammer blow. Unapproved expense transfers. Falsified billing records. Client communications that contradicted internal reports. Mason's face went from pale to gray. Keller's voice shook when he tried to speak. This can't be right. There must be some mistake. The investigator looked at him coldly. We verified every item multiple times, Mr. Keller. These are your signatures. Mason suddenly turned toward me. His eyes desperate. Amelia tells them. You know I would never intentionally falsify anything. This is obviously just a misunderstanding. Everyone's eyes shifted to me. I met his gaze calmly. I don't know what you're talking about, Mason. I wasn't involved in any of these decisions. Remember, you took over the Henderson project. His mouth opened then closed. The room had turned frigid. People weren't just looking at him with suspicion now. They were looking at him with disgust. The fallout was swift and brutal. Keller was suspended pending further investigation. Mason was immediately escorted out of the building by security that same afternoon. I watched from my office window as he made the walk of shame across the parking lot, carrying a small box of personal items. His shoulders were hunched, his face hidden. It was the same walk I had imagined making just weeks ago when I thought my career was over. But I survived. He hadn't. Staff members gathered in small clusters whispering while watching. The same people who had smiled at his jokes and praised his work now turned away. Corporate reputation is a fragile thing built slowly and destroyed instantly. Mason had learned that the hardest way possible. Jessica stopped by my office later. "I can't believe it," she said. "He seemed so nice and so professional." Shrugged. "Some people are very good at pretending." She looked at me thoughtfully. "You knew, didn't you? You knew something was wrong." I didn't answer directly. I just trusted that the truth would come out eventually. And it did. She nodded slowly, then left. The office felt different now. Like a weight had been lifted. In the aftermath, my reputation quietly rehabilitated itself. People who had believed Mason's lies about me now saw them for what they were: deflection and manipulation. HR called me in and I tensed, expecting more questions and more accusations. Instead, they offered me something unexpected. "Amelia, we've reviewed your file and your conduct throughout this situation. We were impressed by your professionalism. We'd like you to lead a new ethics and compliance initiative for the entire consulting division." I blinked at processing. They wanted me to lead. After everything that had happened. The HR director smiled. "You maintained integrity when it would have been easier to retaliate. That's exactly the kind of leadership we need." I accepted, trying to keep my voice steady. This wasn't just vindication. It was elevated. The power shift felt surreal. Just weeks ago I had been pushed aside and dismissed. Now I was being trusted with department-wide responsibility. Mason had tried to destroy me, but instead he had cleared a path for my rise. Sometimes karma doesn't just balance the scales. Sometimes it tips them entirely in your favor. Months later, I stood in the same conference room where Keller had humiliated me. But everything was different now. New leadership had taken over, and they were announcing organizational changes. "Amelia has demonstrated exceptional judgment and integrity during a challenging period," said the new regional director. "We're promoting her to Senior Director of Client Relations effective immediately." Applause filled the room. I looked out at my team with some of the same faces that had watched my earlier humiliation. Now they were clapping for me genuinely. No arrogance filled my chest. Just quiet pride. I had survived the worst and come out stronger. Mason's name was never mentioned in the announcement, never brought up in the transition meetings. It was like he had been erased from company history. That was his legacy. Not success, not recognition, but complete erasure. After the meeting, several junior staff approached me asking for advice for mentorship. I agreed, of course. But this time I would be more careful. I would watch for warning signs for people who took without giving, who smiled while plotting. The experience had taught me that not everyone deserves your trust. Some people see kindness as weakness. And those people I would spot early. 6 months after his termination, I ran into Mason accidentally at a coffee shop downtown. I was waiting for my order when I noticed him sitting alone in the corner. He looked different. Thinner. Tired. His expensive suit had been replaced by wrinkled khakis and a cheap button-down. He was staring at a laptop, probably searching job boards. Our eyes met across the room. Recognition flickered in his face, followed by something that looked like shame. He stood hesitantly and walked toward me. "Amelia." He nodded. "Mason." He shifted his weight nervously. "Look, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. What I did to you was wrong." The words sounded genuine, but I felt nothing. No anger. No satisfaction. Just indifference. "I'm sure you are, Mason. I hope you've learned from it." He looked like he wanted to say more, maybe to explain or justify or beg for forgiveness. But I turned back to the counter when my name was called. I picked up my coffee, smiled politely, and said, "Take care, Mason." Then I walked away. That was power. Not revenge. Not gloating. Just moving forward, leaving the past where it belonged. A year later, I was leading my own division with a team of 15 talented people who actually respected me. My office overlooked the city, and I spent mornings reviewing projects that excited me, challenged me, and made me feel alive. Younger staff sought my guidance, and I gave it freely while staying watchful for red flags. The betrayal had changed me, made me wiser and more cautious. But it didn't make me bitter. I still believed in mentoring and helping people grow. I just understood now that not everyone should be trusted with that gift. Sometimes I thought about Mason and Keller, about that horrible day in the conference room. The memories no longer hurt. They were just facts of my history lessons learned in the hardest way. I had been cut off from my project, isolated and humiliated. But I survived. More than survived. I had risen. Because truth really does have a way of outlasting ambition. And karma. She always keeps the receipts. Even when it takes time, even when it seems like the liars are winning, karma is patient. It waits, it watches, and eventually she collects. I had learned that lesson. Mason had too, though his version was far more painful.